Flight MH370, one of the greatest mysteries in the history of civil aviation. On March 8, 2014, a Boeing 777 belonging to Malaysian Airlines suddenly disappeared from radar screens with 239 people on board. It will never be seen again.
A Boeing 777 obviously doesn't just disappear.
So right out of the gate, it's clear that something very unusual and very strange was happening with this airplane.
In July 2018, after 4 years of investigation, Malaysia abandons the search and comes to a terrible conclusion. It is not able to determine the causes of the aircraft loss.
Australia, China, and Malaysia have collectively decided to suspend the search.
In the first episode of this documentary series, we will attempt to understand the failure of this investigation, which monopolized hundreds of experts and cost millions of dollars.
The reason for the failure is that we didn't search the right area.
I think the fundamental problem was that Malaysia was ill-prepared.
We unveiled the inconsistencies published in the official report.
I started to realize that everything we had been told, which substantiated the idea of a turnback and of a flight over Malaysia, was completely unfounded.
This had never been mentioned. No data collected from that had ever been mentioned.
We also shone a light on the gray areas surrounding this extraordinary case.
So, is MH370 a crime scene? Is it a crime? Are we investigating a crime here? The possibility is certainly yes.
But the story doesn't end there. Today, many experts refuse to accept this conclusion. Driven by the desire to understand what happened to Flight MH370, they have been reviewing the investigation in an attempt to find out more.
Clearly, all these events and points are not a coincidence.
I realized there are reports and maybe there is something to do behind it.
In the second episode, they reveal unprecedented discoveries that help us understand what happened in the night of March 8, 2014.
This cargo is loaded without being scanned.
What it later turned out was that the Inmarsat communication system had been turned off and then turned back on again.
After the diversion, there were 7 turns. If no one's flying it, there's no reason for an aircraft to do 7 turns.
We have a credible witness that also corroborates the hypothesis of a crash in the South China Sea. And so, my theory starts to take shape.
Why and how did Flight MH370 disappear?
From my perspective, there's 3 sides to every story. Your side, my side, and the truth is somewhere between the 2.
Never have we been so close to the truth. July 30th, 2018, more than 4 years after the disaster, a turning point in the case of Flight MH370. The Malaysian authorities in charge of the investigation finally reveal their conclusions to the public in a report of more than 1,000 pages. What happened? Where is the Malaysian Airlines Boeing 777 that disappeared on March 8th, 2014?
This report is released at this point of time because we do not know whether there will be a search in another time or whether there will be another team who will be assigned this task again. But as far as our team is concerned, we have done our job, we are ready to release it, and the government said yes, we can release it, so we release it at this point of time.
Don Thompson, an Irish engineer specialized in aeronautics, has followed the events from the start and noted shortcomings in the Malaysian report.
We don't have any real significant, tangible results. They didn't write about any analysis, and they didn't detail what their certainty was.
Despite the hundreds of documents gathered during the 4-year investigation, the dozens of analysis and testimonies, the Malaysian investigators have to admit they don't know how to go further.
The report is factual. It contains many factual things, many elements, and sources of information. And when you read it, you think you can take away quite a few things from it. Unfortunately, it's not conclusive, meaning that it doesn't provide enough elements to be able to say that is where the plane is.
Several experts are convinced. To solve this mystery, they must first understand what went wrong at the very start of the MH370 case. March 8, 2014. We are in northeast China, in Beijing's huge international airport. 120,000 passengers transit through daily, but this morning, some of them never arrived. Flight MH370, operated by Malaysian Airlines, is several hours late.
The flight took off at 12:41. We know that there are families in Beijing waiting to pick up their loved ones, but we still have no communication from Malaysia Airlines or the Malaysian government.
Departing from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, the Boeing 777 was to travel 2,670 miles to reach Beijing, the Chinese capital, at 6:30 a.m. On board, 239 people of 14 different nationalities, including many Chinese. In the arrivals hall, the passengers' relatives are starting to panic.
No news, no nothing.
Pas d'informations, rien du tout. On attend encore, toujours pas d'infos. Donc on est un peu inquiet.
This incredible situation is not typical of Malaysian Airlines. Malaysia's national and largest airlines has an excellent reputation and has never encountered any major problems. In 2014, Hugh Dunleavy holds the very strategic position of commercial director.
Malaysia Airlines was one of the few 5-star airlines in the world. I think there are only about 6 or 7 airlines in the world that are rated 5 class. Malaysia Airlines was one of those and had been so for many, many years.
Should we be worried by this disappearance? At 12 p.m., after a long 6-hour wait, the airline finally makes an announcement.
That this flight, MH370, lost contact with Subang Air Traffic Control at 2:40 a.m. this morning.
The announcement plunges the families into dismay. How could this happen to one of the safest airlines in the world? How is it possible to lose track of an aircraft in the 21st century? To understand, we must look back a few hours. In the night of March 8, 2014, at 12:40 a.m., flight MH370 left the runway at Kuala Lumpur Airport. 40 minutes later, at 1:19 a.m., the Boeing 777 is about to leave Malaysian airspace and enter Vietnamese airspace.
At that moment, everything is normal. As he leaves the Malaysian control zone, he says goodbye.
Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night. Good night, Malaysian 370.
Good night, signed Malaysian 370. These are the final words from the aircraft's pilot. 6 seconds later, as it's about to enter Vietnamese airspace, the plane suddenly disappears from radar screens.
The rule is that we should recontact them within a minute or so. We call them to say hi and introduce ourselves. They find us on the radar and authorize us to enter the country and follow the route in the flight plan. Within that minute, the pilot should have contacted the next control zone, that is, the Vietnamese control zone.
But the aircraft didn't contact Ho Chi Minh.
Focused on managing traffic, the air traffic controllers don't immediately realize what's happening.
The Vietnamese air traffic controller woke up 15 minutes after the time he should have received the call. It was a very long time.
Part of the report is dedicated to the transcripts of conversations between control towers and the airline. When rereading them, some experts have noted the confusion that reigned throughout the night.
Still negative contact with Malaysian 370.
Confirm, still negative contact with Malaysian 370.
Affirm, negative contact.
Reference to the company Malaysian Airlines. The aircraft is still flying. It is somewhere over Cambodia.
Somewhere over Cambodia?
Affirm.
The aircraft is landing.
Say again?
Affirm, Malaysian 370 still flying aircraft.
Everything about the way that they behaved is indicative to me that they were just caught flat-footed. Nothing was expected, and so everyone responded in like the slowest possible way.
There was a lot of uncertainty because the aircraft was silent, and that's worrying. After a while, when they didn't declare a danger, and it had been a while since any information was sent, since contact was lost, that's when they thought maybe something more serious has happened. They lacked decisiveness. They were calm, but they didn't know what to do and kind of tried a bit of everything, and they shouldn't have. They should have launched the procedure to figure it out ASAP.
It's an incredible situation. The renowned Malaysian Airlines has totally lost track of one of its aircrafts. Within hours, the news attracts media attention worldwide.
First up, a potentially terrible air disaster. A Malaysia Airlines Boeing 777 has disappeared from radar screens.
Faced with this unprecedented event, investigative journalist Florence Duchangi has questions.
I heard the news on vacation. I was listening to the Italian radio RAI and heard Malaysia Airlines. I thought, what's going on? Not only was it a very safe aircraft and an excellent airline, it was a routine flight. And so I thought, a Boeing 777 obviously doesn't just disappear.
Does the airline still have a chance to find its aircraft? The authorities hope so and launch an important marine search. South China Sea. This large area is where the search for MH370 starts. More specifically, the place where the aircraft signal was lost. Within hours, military ships and helicopters are dispatched to the area in an attempt to find the aircraft and any potential survivors.
At that point, we also believe that the aircraft, if it has gone down anywhere, it's probably gone down in the South China Sea. We've contacted Air Sea Rescue, and of course, when you contact these type of agencies, they'll want to know, well, where do you want us to go look? And that's the one question we could not answer because we don't know the physical location of the aircraft.
This method of searching is tedious, but history shows that it can sometimes help find precious clues. Like MH370 on June 1, 2009, Air France flight AF447 connecting Rio to Paris suddenly disappears somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean. Within hours, a search is launched, and 4 days later, debris is found. But it will take almost 2 years to locate the wreck and understand the causes of the accident. This success, internationally recognized in the world of aeronautics, is due to the BEA, the French Bureau of Investigation and Analysis, and its director, Jean-Paul Troadec, who was soon asked to help the Malaysian authorities.
In the first few days after the accident, the BEA was contacted by the Malaysian authorities, who wanted our expertise in marine search. At the time, they were searching for the wreck. What means could they use to find a wreck at the bottom of the ocean? And of course, it was our experience searching for the Rio-Paris flight that the Malaysians were interested in.
Arriving on site, Jean-Paul Troadec is struck by the disorganization of the search. The Malaysians seem overwhelmed.
In the first few hours, there was a lot of confusion. The Malaysians were not prepared to deal with this type of accident. Every day, long-haul flights fly over their seas, but they had never done any marine search and rescue exercises, something which the BEA has done for years. They had no idea of the means required to search for a wreck at the bottom of the ocean. They were lost.
We are unable to inform to all of you that any object was wrecked.
This point in time, the search and rescue team has started since morning.
We don't know the details because everyone is asking for details, which we simply do not have. We're working hard with the various search and rescue and government agencies of all the countries that are potential assistance to the situation to help us, but we don't have any more information. But we're happy to answer as many questions as we can, but be aware, we may not be able to give you definitive answers if you're saying, where is the aircraft? We simply don't know.
My newspaper, Le Monde, asked me to go to Malaysia to cover this story because it had gone from an almost banal plane crash to a true mystery, as we still didn't have a single element. It was very, very chaotic.
Given the extremely poor communication, people started to come up with a number of theories and conspiracy theories.
How can we understand this disappearance with no crime scene, no clues, no witnesses? In the absence of material evidence, fantasy and imagination get the better of reality, as shown by this announcement from a Malaysia Airlines representative postulating that the plane could have landed in China.
Il y a des rumeurs comme quoi l'avion se serait posé à Nanning en Chine. Nous travaillons pour vérifier l'authenticité de ces informations.
I think that's one of the first rumors that was spreading in China as those families waited in Beijing and the flight didn't arrive. The rumor was that it actually was diverted to Nanning for safety reasons, but that was false. And so in the absence of accurate information from the organization, people are going to start to speculate. And so we definitely saw that on social media and the internet with MH370.
From the Bermuda Triangle to aliens, the craziest theories start to multiply.
You get almost immediately a proliferation of people coming out of the woodwork and throwing every kind of possible theory against the wall. You get people who said, oh, I was on a boat at the time and I saw this fireball going through the sky.
CNN issued a survey that indicated that at one point about 9% of Americans actually believed that aliens could have potentially hijacked the plane.
How can we navigate all this information? Often unverified or even false. The subject dominates the media, and journalists try to provide answers. From the very start, Florence Duchangi develops a passion for this extraordinary case.
I think that if it had been a cargo plane whose only victims were the pilots doing their job, it wouldn't have had the same impact as a commercial aircraft with 239 people on board, including 3 babies. The fact that there were all these passengers on board, obviously, contributed to my motivation to uncover the truth.
If people around the world are fascinated and puzzled, behind the scenes, Malaysia Airlines is in a difficult spot. After 30 hours without news, Hugh Dunlevy, the airline's commercial director, sets himself the difficult task of communicating with the families despite the lack of any new information.
I will tell you that we have communicated to the family members that after more than 30 hours without any contact with the aircraft, we believe that the family members should prepare themselves for the worst. Information is not important. That event took place after I had communicated with the family members. Of course, they're very upset, they're angry, they're very disturbed about what's happened, and there's this feeling of loss, hopelessness, what's gone on. We don't have a real reason for why their family members are now no longer with them, and what exactly happened is still unknown.
This announcement by Malaysia Airlines commercial director dashes any hope for the families and casts even more mystery on the case. In the Malaysian capital, almost 2 days after the disappearance, local authorities are about to make a troubling announcement to the hundreds of journalists on site. Their discovery will disrupt any previously held certainty on the fate of the plane and its 239 passengers.
Actually, we look back at the recording, and there is an indication, possible indication, that the aircraft made a turn back.
The announcement is astonishing. MH370 might have turned back. Military radars, capable of detecting any aircraft in the sky, even when communications have been cut off, recorded the passing of the Malaysia Airlines Boeing 777. After several checks, they noted that the aircraft continued flying after its disappearance, made a U-turn, and flew back over Malaysia towards the Strait of Malacca.
Over the weekend of 8th, 9th of March and through into the 10th, it started to become known that the Air Force had detected this air turn back of MH370. It's incredible.
Everyone is astounded. It's just incomprehensible that a plane would turn back for no reason, without announcing it on the radio, without telling anyone. It was truly unbelievable.
That puts everything in a whole different category. Because when you look at plane crashes, typically what you're trying to do is to put it in the context of other crashes that have happened in the past. Like, that's your first level of understanding. Did the engine fall off? Was it a hijacking? Did it explode? What sort of bin can we put it in? What is it like? Normally, when things go wrong in commercial aviation, they go wrong quickly. So this plane did not do that at all. In fact, I couldn't even think of a single case of something like this happening, where a plane vanishes from radar and doesn't crash, it actually turns around and keeps flying and goes back the other way. Fast and high, and passes over airports, so it's not in distress, it's not trying to land, it's just making a beeline in the other direction. That's very weird. So right out of the gate, it's clear that something very unusual and very strange was happening with this airplane.
Why would the plane follow this totally erratic trajectory? Diving back into the investigation, Captain Patrick Bleley tries to put himself in the shoes of MH370's pilot and to understand the reasons for this change of direction.
There are several reasons. The first and most common is technical failure. The plane disappears from radars because of a total power failure, a fire, smoke, and pilots are supposed to save the plane, crew, and passengers. The idea is to turn back and find the nearest possible landing site. It's called a deviation. Other reasons include hijacking, where someone takes control of the aircraft against the crew's will and what was planned by the airline. In this case, connecting Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. That is a whole different scenario. That is a terrorism issue.
In New York, investigative journalist Jeff Wise decides to dive into this haunting mystery. For weeks, he attempts to analyze this trajectory, which no safety protocol, no regulation, and no rational behavior can explain.
I saw a plane that waited until it was right at the edge of an airspace, turned off its electronics, did a 180, and hightailed it in the other direction. Right off the bat, that tells me that it's not an accident, that it was intentional, and that whoever did it knew what they were doing. And to me, that suggested intent, and it suggested sophistication. So, is MH370 a crime scene? Is it a crime? Are we investigating a crime here? The possibility is certainly yes.
In the Malaysian capital, the incredible announcement of a turnback has caused utter confusion. Who to believe? Who to listen to this totally unprecedented situation in the history of aviation? Gathered in their hundreds, journalists from around the world harass the passengers' loved ones, desperately searching for a scoop.
Incredible confusion reigned in Kuala Lumpur. Every day, new stories broke, and the hundreds of media present just gobbled them up. We received the information that there had been 2 Iranians on board. 2 Iranians who had traveled with fake passports. So that mobilized media attention for 24 or 48 hours. Then there was the scandal, the pseudo-scandal, in which we discovered that 2 years earlier, on a flight from Thailand, the co-pilot had invited 2 beautiful young girls into the cockpit with him. There were all sorts of stories like that, which sent us media running all over the place.
We have the 24-hour news cycle. That means that we need content to fill those 24 hours. It also means that news organizations are competing with each other to make sure that they have the most up-to-date information, that they are the ones to release the newest information, the most current data to their viewers.
Faced with this media frenzy, the political authorities, the airline, and the military start to multiply the press conferences.
Yes, with that turnback, does the radar record reflect how much of a turnback it made? In other words, did it come back kilometers, 20 kilometers, 10?
I think that's
we are still looking at that.
We're still looking at
Forensic.
Dans un accident comme celui-là, il est important qu'au départ...
In an accident like this one, it's important for the communication to be well managed from the start and managed by professionals. But in Malaysia's case, the communication was taken care of by political authorities, not by aeronautical professionals. In countries that have a professional investigation bureau, this bureau is the only body authorized to communicate. From my point of view, one of the reasons there is so much suspicion surrounding this investigation and this event is that it started with very chaotic communication.
From the very early days of MH370, there was a lot of frustration on the part of the press with the Malaysian authorities. It seemed that they were not being forthright. My interpretation personally was that they were embarrassed. Malaysian Airlines is the flag carrier of the country, and it is a point of considerable pride that this is a good airline. It was embarrassing that they had failed to notice that the plane went missing for quite a while. I think it was embarrassing that they did not apparently notice it at the time on their military radars. And I think they were horrified at the possibility that maybe the person who took the plane was their own pilot.
After the astonishing announcement of a turnback, questions start to arise. What did MH370 do after crossing the Strait of Malacca? Where did it go after it vanished from military radars? With these question marks looming, the case undergoes a new twist almost a week after the disappearance. British capital London is now at the heart of media attention. On March 14, a satellite communications company called Inmarsat published an explosive statement. This company might not be a household name, but it has been operating a satellite communication system on almost all airliners for close to 25 years.
So Inmarsat is a UK-based company. It is a consortium of international nations. Basically, it operates a fleet of satellites, and it provides satellite communication services.
Inmarsat reveals that after cutting off communications at 1:19 a.m. and disappearing from military radars at 2:25 a.m., the aircraft automatically reconnected to one of their satellites. These connections between the Boeing 777 and the satellite provide some certainty. The aircraft didn't crash into the South China Sea. It continued to fly until 8 a.m., at which point it probably would have run out of fuel.
The bombshell that really glued people into their seats was the revelation that took place about a week after the plane disappeared, that Inmarsat had recorded this data that had been automatically transmitted by the plane's satellite communication system. And it told us, to everyone's incredible and absolute astonishment, that this plane had stayed in the air for 6 hours. It had stayed in the air for 6 hours. I can't even tell you how completely astonishing and unexpected that was.
Which meant the aircraft was still operating with power and had been airborne until 19 minutes past 8 local time Malaysia on the Saturday morning. It was a significant piece of information, and it sort of, I guess it changed the direction of everything at that point.
In Malaysia, where the investigation is stalling, Prime Minister Najib Razak confirms the information at a press conference.
Clearly, the search for MH370 has entered a new phase. For the families and friends of those involved, we hope this new information brings us one step closer to finding the plane.
But this discovery poses a burning question. If the plane continued flying for hours, which way did it go? This key piece of information is missing from Inmarsat's raw data. Diving back into the case, Jeff Wise discovers something about the company.
Malaysian Airlines had subscribed to the cheapest level of service that Inmarsat offered. So basically, it just said, "Hi, I'm here," and it didn't transmit any information with that. If it had paid for a higher level of subscription, it would have transmitted its location as well. It didn't do that. Okay, so how do we tell where this plane was? Can we, this is the question that Inmarsat engineers immediately ask themselves. We have this data from this plane. Can we somehow use it to solve this mystery? Can we deduce its location from something about these signals? And it turned out that there were some intriguing clues.
Indeed, the data recorded by the company holds several clues. The first relates to the connections between the plane and satellite and confirms that the aircraft remained airborne. Then, these pings, as specialists call them, don't help to locate MH370, but to know, hour by hour, how far away the plane is from the satellite, a measurement represented by arcs. This step forward allows for several possibilities.
It could either have gone north into Central Asia, somewhere, we didn't know where, or it went somewhere south into the southern Indian Ocean. Now, at this point, we had no idea which of those two was correct. So it either probably went to Kazakhstan or it went into the southern Indian Ocean. We did not know which.
Which way did MH370 go? The data from the pings received from the satellite don't tell us, and for 10 days, media speculation tries to fill in the gaps. Journalist Jeff Wise, now obsessed with this mystery, puts forward a pretty incredible theory.
The week before the plane disappeared, there had been an Uzbek uprising in China, a part of China that's Central Asia. Now, all we knew is that the plane went somewhere in Central Asia. We knew that there had been an Uzbek uprising, and I thought 2 and 2 makes 4. My prime suspect, right out of the gate, was Chinese Uzbek separatists. That's crazy, right? This is where Jeff Wise kind of like goes out on a limb. And my editor thought that that was crazy and said, "If you are wrong, will you apologize?" And I said, yes. And so then, pretty soon after that, more of the data came out, more of the data was analyzed, and I was like, okay, I'm wrong, and I wrote an explanation. She held me to it. She made me write an article saying, I was wrong, this is why I was wrong, and so, mea culpa.
For several days, Inmarsat's engineers refine their analysis. They finally reach a certainty. Flight MH370 headed towards the southern Indian Ocean. On March 24th in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak makes a new announcement, this time with immense gravity.
Based on their new analysis, Inmarsat have concluded that MH370 flew along the southern corridor and that its last position was in the middle of the Indian Ocean. This is a remote location, far from any possible landing sites. It is therefore with deep sadness and regret that I must inform you that flight MH370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean.
After weeks of speculation, this announcement provides families with the certainty that the passengers and crew of flight MH370 will not be found alive. This opens a new chapter, finding the plane and its black boxes. On March 25, 2014, all eyes are now on the southern Indian Ocean. An area 1,200 miles off the west coast of Australia is now the focus of the search for flight MH370.
It was a real challenge to the Malaysian culture, and a lot of work and a lot of focus was done within Malaysia to help out as much as we could, identifying what we could do about finding the aircraft, which triggered that largest and most complex search in aviation history.
Faced with the magnitude of the task, Malaysia, in charge of the investigation, delegates the search operation to Australia.
So the best people in the world have actually put their efforts into identifying the search area for us.
C'est une décision politique de l'Australie.
It's an Australian political decision because we're off the coast of Australia. They consider it to be kind of their territory. And so they wanted to show that it was happening in their country. But there was a certain practical logic to it because it's easier to get boats from Australia than from countries that are much further away.
But the operation proves incredibly complex. The teams are searching for the plane's black boxes in a place where the ocean can reach a depth of almost 23,000 feet. To do so, they must try to locate signals emitted by the flight recorders, which can be detected up to 3.7 miles away. Jean-Paul Trudec is always on hand to provide his expertise to the search teams.
They are active signals, and those must be searched for first. Very quickly, you have to place microphones into the sea that will be able to detect these signals. The issue is that time is of the essence.
Indeed, these boxes only emit for 30 days, and the search area is huge.
We were confronted with an extremely vast zone, a kind of arc off the coast of Australia. And this arc wasn't just a precise line, it was more of a band. And when you do the math, it represents an absolutely huge search area.
The only solution is to refine the search parameter in the hope of passing over the wreck and detecting the black box signals. This is what the Australian authorities tried to do.
Day by day, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau continues to refine the area where the aircraft may have entered the water, based on continuing groundbreaking and multidisciplinary technical analysis.
April 8, 2014, a first failure for the Australian authorities. They still haven't found the black boxes and now know that they have stopped emitting. The teams must settle for scanning the ocean floor using sonar. It will take months or even years to find the wreck. Another blow for the families of the missing.
this created some very heated moments between the Malaysian government and the passengers' families as they were, trying to get clarity on what happened to our loved ones, and the Malaysian government was not being forthright.
On July 29, 2015, after 575 days of unsuccessful searching, a new development shakes up the case. A piece of plane wing, a flaperon, washes up on one of the Reunion Island's French beaches. This surprising discovery places the case back at the heart of media attention.
Is the disappearance of flight MH370 about to be explained? Footage from Reunion Island could help solve the mystery.
In July of 2015, a piece of debris washed up on Reunion Island, and the other end of the Indian Ocean, thousands of miles from where the plane disappeared. And if the plane went in the southern Indian Ocean, one of the questions people were asking from very early on was, well, where's the debris? Finally, okay, here's debris.
Can it really be a piece of the Malaysia Airlines Boeing 777? The debris would have traveled more than 3,000 miles without sinking. Journalist Florence Duchangi questions this eventuality.
You have to remember that the Indian Ocean is one of the fiercest oceans on the planet. This means that over the course of a year and a half, the flaperon would have been through dozens of storms and gradually filled with water. So, at first, its appearance is spectacular, exceptional, almost miraculous.
To be certain that the part belongs to MH370, it is sealed and transported to a laboratory at the Directorate General of Armaments near Toulouse, France. But one detail slows down the investigators' identification process. The debris has no serial number, despite every part requiring one. A detail picked up by journalist Florence Duchangi.
The flaperon, discovered on Reunion Island, had lost its serial plate. This was hugely problematic. There is no good physical reason for this flaperon to have lost its plate over the course of a few months in the Indian Ocean.
For Patrick Blelly, a pilot for a major airline, this event is not at all surprising.
At first, people tried to say that the flaperon didn't belong to the aircraft. There's nothing to justify this, even if a plate was missing. Very frequently, during aircraft maintenance, when a technician doesn't want any trouble from a plate that's in the way during a repair, they remove it and don't put it back. Job done.
On August 5, 2015, as more and more questions arise surrounding the flaperon, the results of the analysis carried out by the French experts are revealed.
In light of the observations made by the expert, we can say today that it is highly likely that the flaperon found on a Reunion Island beach on July 29, 2015, belongs to the MH370 Boeing 777.
Argyris Kemalakos, an expert specialized in aeronautical structures, quickly took an interest in the French experts' conclusions.
They measured the drag of the flaperon in the air and in the sea, and everything looks possible. Also, it was covered with a lot of shells of different sizes who grow in different parts of the ocean with different temperatures. So all the indication was that he made a long trajectory, a year and a half in the sea, until he ended up on the beach.
The arrival of debris on Reunion Island indeed provides information because it provides the certainty that a plane crashed into the Indian Ocean. Until then, it was a hypothesis. We now have a tangible piece of the plane, which was eventually identified as belonging to the aircraft. And so, this reinforces the idea that the Indian Ocean is where we need to search.
The incredible discovery of the flaperon will unfortunately not help the search teams find the plane. So where must they search when there is no clue as to the precise location of the wreck?
It's like a needle in a haystack, but even worse. I think it's a needle in a field of haystacks. You first have to find the right haystack.
Did the Malaysian investigation go far enough? Must we reinterpret the clues discovered throughout the case?
We're going to start over, from when the plane disappears from radar screens.
In the next episode of this documentary series, independent investigators re-examine the Malaysian report in search of new clues. They follow new leads and come to unprecedented conclusions.
I started to realize that everything we had been told, which substantiated the idea of a turnback and of a flight over Malaysia, was completely unfounded.
Why there was no mention in any of the official reports of ADS-B data.
We found various elements allowing us to confirm that electricity was restored on board.
Thanks to their investigative work, the mystery of Flight MH370 is about to be unraveled.
Can it happen accidentally? No, it really can't.
Flight MH370, one of the greatest mysteries in the history of civil aviation. On March 8, 2014, a Boeing 777 belonging to Malaysian Airlines suddenly disappeared from radar screens with 2,039 people on board. It will never be seen again.
A Boeing 777 obviously doesn't just disappear.
So right out of the gate, it's clear that something very unusual and very strange was happening with this airplane.
In July 2018, after 4 years of investigation, Malaysia abandons the search and comes to a terrible conclusion. It is not able to determine the causes of the aircraft loss.
Australia, China, and Malaysia have collectively decided to suspend the search.
In the first episode of this documentary series, we will attempt to understand the failure of this investigation, which monopolized hundreds of experts and cost millions of dollars.
The reason for the failure is that we didn't search the right area.
I think the fundamental problem was that Malaysia was ill-prepared.
We unveiled the inconsistencies published in the official report.
I started to realize that everything we had been told, which substantiated the idea of a turnback and of a flight over Malaysia, was completely unfounded.
This had never been mentioned. No data collected from that had ever been mentioned.
We also shone a light on the gray areas surrounding this extraordinary case.
So, is MH370 a crime scene? Is it a crime? Are we investigating a crime here? The possibility is certainly yes.
But the story doesn't end there. Today, many experts refuse to accept this conclusion. Driven by the desire to understand what happened to Flight MH370, they have been reviewing the investigation in an attempt to find out more.
Clearly, all these events and points are not a coincidence.
I realized there are reports and maybe there is something to do behind it.
In the second episode, they reveal unprecedented discoveries that help us understand what happened in the night of March 8, 2014.
This cargo is loaded without being scanned.
What it later turned out was that the Inmarsat communication system had been turned off and then turned back on again.
After the diversion, there were 7 turns. If no one's flying it, there's no reason for an aircraft to do 7 turns.
We have a credible witness that also corroborates the hypothesis of a crash in the South China Sea. And so, my theory starts to take shape.
Why and how did flight MH370 disappear?
From my perspective, there's 3 sides to every story. Your side, my side, and the truth is somewhere between the 2.
Never before have we been so close to the truth. July 2017, in the middle of the Indian Ocean. For more than 3 years, Australian authorities have been pursuing the largest underwater search campaign in history. But after spending over 1,000 days at sea, exploring more than 120,000 square kilometers off seabed, or 3 times the size of the state of Mississippi, the investigators have to face reality. This mission is quasi-impossible.
It is indeed a needle in a haystack, but it's even worse than that, because, in my opinion, it's a field of haystacks. First, you have to find the haystack that might hold the needle.
We were faced with an extremely large area, like an arc of a circle off the coast of Australia that wasn't just a precise line, but a whole strip. And when you do the math, it corresponds to a totally gigantic area that had to be searched.
Unfortunately, with all the ships that were in that region doing the searching, we still were not able to locate the aircraft, which, quite frankly, is not that surprising considering the scale of ocean that had to be searched.
How can they continue spending so much money without being sure of finding the wreckage? In July 2017, the authorities make a difficult decision and put an end to the search for flight MH370.
And in the absence of credible new evidence, Australia, China, and Malaysia have collectively decided to suspend the search upon the completion of the 120,000 square kilometer search area.
A year later, Malaysia publishes the official report of their investigation in which they acknowledge their failure. Despite 4 years of work, the mystery seems unsolvable. To their great despair, the families of the victims have obtained no answers.
It was unbearable for the families. Everyone knows that mourning without a body is much, much more complicated. That's why I have immense sympathy for these families.
While the nations in charge of the investigation seem to give up, several voices around the world make themselves heard with one conviction. It is essential to understand the reasons behind this disappearance.
We should not sustain the idea that we can lose an aircraft, okay? So there's a couple of thousand people who are going to bed every night, waking up every morning, and they don't know where their relatives and their friends are. And I think that is something that should be closed as well. That matter should be closed.
The reason why it failed is that they didn't look in the right place. The area was so vast. A number of assumptions were made about the trajectory of the aircraft. They defined an area, they searched, and found nothing, which means the wreck was elsewhere.
I do believe that the aircraft will be found. We've just got to try harder.
While many enthusiasts decide to conduct their own counter-investigation, a unique group of experts start to emerge as a reference in the aviation community. Its name? The Independent Group. Among its members are Don Thompson and journalist Jeff Wise, both obsessed with this mystery.
At a time where there was so much misinformation, so much lunacy, so much crazy, ungrounded ideas, and people like with mental health issues who were throwing in like their visions and their ideas that were just loopy. And so to have a group of people who could kind of gather together, and really keep it to a strict technical discussion was very invaluable.
The initial objectives of the independent group were really to establish what observations and data were actually factual, were credible, and therefore could be taken forward to try and determine where the aircraft impacted the ocean.
The first 6 months was kind of the glory period, where we were really making progress and kind of pooling our insight, pooling our technical knowledge, exchanging ideas, and coming up with a really well-grounded, scientifically grounded set of explanations.
When Malaysia publishes its investigative report on July 30th, 2018, the group of experts is quick to voice its viewpoint.
The Malaysian investigation is just simply not rigorous enough, and certainly they're not demonstrating any real level of rigor. That's kind of frustrating because ultimately it's a Malaysian problem. The aircraft was operated by a Malaysian airline, it was operated out of a Malaysian airport, etc.
Little by little, several experts form an opinion. To maximize the chances of finding the aircraft, the satellite data must be studied in more detail so as to determine with more accuracy the end of the trajectory of flight MH370 after passing the 7th arc.
The Australian Civil Aviation Safety Authority began with the assumption that the 7th arc was indeed the end of the flight, and that it was where the plane had exhausted its fuel. With the analysis of the Inmarsat satellite data, they concluded that since the downward speed was very high, the plane was in free fall or nose down, and that the drop point was very close to the 7th arc. But they didn't know exactly what trajectory it had followed. The plane continued to fly after the last Inmarsat signal. What did it do afterwards? Did it continue to glide? A plane gliding at this altitude can fly for 120 kilometers. It can fall steeply. If you don't make these hypotheses, you get nothing from the Inmarsat data.
As a result, engineer Don Thompson tries to put satellite data to the test of a new hypothesis. What if the plane had continued to glide after exhausting its fuel at the 7th arc? After several weeks of work and calculations, the engineer determines a new sector, still in the vicinity of the 7th arc, but this time located further south.
It then became feasible for independent investigators to execute some flight path modeling. That allowed us to make some amendments to the assumptions we had carried to that time and become more precise about the line of the 7th arc. The line of the 7th arc is really the most critical one because it's the line of position that describes where the aircraft is likely to have impacted the ocean.
Could this new boundary contain the wreckage of flight MH370? The independent group is hopeful. Without hesitation, they transmit their results to the authorities. In the Malaysian capital, nearly a year after throwing in the towel, the authorities make an unexpected announcement. The search will resume. This time, they will be led by the American company Ocean Infinity.
Based on the agreement, Ocean Infinity will undertake search operation to locate flight MH370 at an area of 25,000 square kilometers search at the South Indian Ocean. Most important, they must find the debris field. A debris field then is just a piece of wreckage, but it has to be the plane, the aircraft, and or the flight recorder.
We were able to bring some fresh sight to that, and indeed that was what we took away from that was adopted for the 2018 search. All the parties agreed on a definitive line of position for the 7th arc.
Will the independent group's work finally lead to the recovery of flight MH370? For the families, hope is rekindled.
So at least there is still hope. You have not given up, and neither have we. All right, so we are thankful for the government of Malaysia to say yes, lifted the suspension and started the search again. Hopefully at the end of the day, we can put it all to rest.
On January 23, 2018, new searches began in the South Indian Ocean. A state-of-the-art oceanographic boat is dispatched to the site with the greatest experts on board. For this last chance mission, 8 autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, are mobilized. These drones are capable of diving to a record 5,000 meters deep. Equipped with high-precision sonar, they coordinate to probe the seabed and find suspicious debris.
They have phenomenal equipment. They have the ultimate in underwater drones. These are drones of military origin that are much bigger and have much more powerful sonar. Ocean Infinity is able to operate 8 or more simultaneously, so they can cover much larger areas and a lot faster.
I do believe that the technology to search the seafloor is increasing in its effectiveness. So we can cover more ground, we can do that more cheaply. So it becomes more cost effective to do these things. It will be found, and I think it needs to be found.
But despite 90 days of hard work in the Indian Ocean, flight MH370 remains without a trace. The new area demarcated by the independent group yields nothing. After this failure, new Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad appears defeated, almost overwhelmed in front of the press.
We cannot keep on searching for something that we really cannot find. If anybody has any information, we will consider resuming the search. But at the moment, we have to put a stop to the search.
Despite state-of-the-art technology and high-level scientific work, the wreckage of flight MH370 is nowhere to be found. For many experts, a burning question now arises. What if they had to go back to square one? Between Hong Kong and Paris, investigative journalist Florence Duchangi works tirelessly to understand this case. What happened on the night of March 8, 2014? Since the beginning of her counter-investigation, she has been inhabited by a firm belief.
At first, I could accept that it was very complicated. But as time passes by, it became less plausible and less acceptable that the plane simply vanished. And this obviously has massive consequences, not only for the friends and families of the 239 people who were on board, but also for civil aviation. Tens of millions of people travel every day. The idea that you can board a plane and totally disappear, never to return, is totally unacceptable.
Where have the Malaysians failed since 2014? One by one, the journalist re-examines all the clues of the official investigation, starting with the Inmarsat data. What if it is misleading? Is it possible that investigators relied on it too much in their search for the plane?
You really have to be aware that the official version is based exclusively on the Inmarsat data. We're talking numbers and letters on a piece of paper. And it's on the basis of these tenuous signals, to say the least, that they claimed with certainty that the plane had crashed in the Indian Ocean. I mean, come on, seriously?
Could the Inmarsat signals have misled investigators? For many experts, this data is part of the rare solid elements of the investigation.
If you don't believe in the validity of these Inmarsat signals, that means you think they've been completely reconstructed. The idea that this company would collude from top to bottom in order to invent false signals seems very, very implausible. Now that we've analyzed the data, we have from different angles. With these various hypotheses and with the various referencing of other data, the probability that it's been tampered with is very low. Inmarsat wouldn't do that because their credibility is at stake. They're operators, they have responsibilities, and they wouldn't discredit themselves by tampering with data. Inventing such a conspiracy is quite a stretch. I think that there would have been leaks or that glaring inconsistencies would have been detected after a while, neither of which happened.
Florence Duchangi continues to doubt the veracity of the information provided by the official Malaysian version. Rereading the investigative report, a first element seems incoherent to her: the radar images which indicate that the plane turned back.
When you look at what the report says about these radar images that supposedly support the overflight, you realize that they're incredibly inconsistent with the Boeing 777. It's crazy to see in the report itself that the first chapter about Malaysian military radar says the following. It became very apparent, however, that the recorded altitude and speed change were well beyond the capability of the aircraft. That's insane. The whole report starts by saying that the flight of a Boeing 777 doesn't match the data. I don't know what else you need to denounce the invalidity of the data.
For engineer Jean-Luc Marchand, there is an explanation for this contradictory information.
The quality of the data is indeed questionable. Personally, I think the fluctuation of the data is due to the system itself. We're not sure that it was well calibrated, that it was regularly running well, that the maintenance was done properly, or that the signal processing was clean enough to rebuild the echoes well.
How is it that this ultra-monitored area boarding several countries, but the Malaysian military radar was the only one to record the U-turn?
No one saw the plane over Malaysia. Of the 7 countries that had radar in the region, not one has been able to provide any radar image of this aircraft. None of the fleets present in the area, whether American, Thai, or Singaporean, especially since there were military exercises, no one had the slightest trace of this plane. I began to realize that everything we'd been told that gave credence to the idea of the U-turn, the idea of flying over Malaysia and going up the Malacca Strait and the final flight to the Indian Ocean was totally unsubstantiated.
Little by little, the reporter becomes convinced. It's not only the Malaysian investigation that must be questioned, but the disappearance itself.
An airplane, let alone a Boeing 777, meaning a large aircraft with a length and wingspan of over 60 meters, doesn't just disappear. You can't just claim, in this day and age, that you've lost a Boeing 777. Soon after the crash came the reaction of Tim Clark, Sir Tim Clark, the president of Emirates, one of the biggest and best airlines in the world, with the largest fleet of Boeing 777s. He was the first to say loud and clear that he didn't believe a word of the story, because a Boeing 777, which his company has more of than anyone else, doesn't just disappear. And it raises concerns that someone with such experience, expertise, status, and credibility would stick their neck out and alienate everyone else by saying loud and clear that this story makes no sense.
How could flight MH370 be lost? What if a military operation was actually behind its disappearance? Little by little, Florence Duchangy built her hypothesis.
In 2014, I heard about a Frenchman who was directly involved in this case for having lost his wife and 2 of his 3 children. He started to share some information with me. In particular, he told me that from the beginning, there was information that American AWACS, planes which are like radar stations in flight or eyes in the sky, were present. A high-level source told him that there were American AWACS in the area and that the Americans knew what happened, but he couldn't say more. Years later, I met someone about the investigation who was very familiar with AWACS, but who didn't know what I knew. He mentioned that the American AWACS have a phenomenal jamming capacity. I don't know if I had a light bulb moment immediately, or if it happened thinking back to this conversation and rereading my notes. But in any case, I finally understood the meaning and importance of the AWACS that were present. I know they were there. I had just learned from a very reliable source that the AWACS have a phenomenal jamming capability. Therefore, the AWACS jammed flight MH370.
According to the military experts we consulted, this hypothesis seems implausible. First, while these aircrafts do have electronic jamming capabilities, they don't have the means to completely remove a Boeing 777 from radar and cut it off from all means of communication without affecting the entire airspace in the area. In addition, the maximum speed of an AWACS is 870 kilometers per hour, but flight MH370 flew at a speed of 950 kilometers per hour. Tailing it was hence impossible. Despite these technical elements, the reporter explains herself.
That's how my scenario started forming, to put it that way. Looking closely again at the official report, I also saw there were 2.5 tons of electronic equipment. This electronic equipment was escorted to the plane on the same evening when the passengers boarded. That's something unheard of. Moreover, this cargo was embarked without being scanned. Something like this never happens. It's totally impossible. An airline should lose its license for taking on board 2.5 tons of anything, as we don't know what it was, without having scanned it.
The Malaysian investigation report, however, specifies the contents of this cargo: lithium batteries made by Motorola. Also stated is the fact that the cargo was not scanned at Kuala Lumpur Airport because it was physically inspected by the company in charge of its transport, mass cargo, and checked before being transported under the seal to the hold of flight MH370. Despite this information, Florence de Changi continues her counter-investigation in search of new elements.
I remember the testimony from someone who had contacted me with utter conviction, not to mention relentlessness, to tell me that he swore to God that he had seen footage on Vietnamese television showing the plane being recovered the very day after the crash. So, we have credible human testimony that also corroborates the thesis, or the hypothesis, rather, of a crash in the South China Sea.
This footage, already broadcast on Vietnamese television, remains untraceable today. However, at the end of her investigation, the reporter formulated a hypothesis based on her research. What if Flight MH370 was carrying sensitive cargo and had fallen victim to a military operation in the Chinese Sea involving the United States? A scenario far removed from the official Malaysian investigation.
Well, first you have to find a valid reason. Was there a valid reason to do this? Regarding Inmarsat, some people say they're British and at the beck and call of the Americans. Now we're getting into conspiracy theories. What reason did they or the Americans have for hiding it? Other people have said that secret cargo had been loaded onto the plane. Do you think the Americans had to shoot down a plane? If they wanted to recover something, they'd have done it without doing that. I don't believe any of these theories.
Aeronautical experts remain cautious about calling into question the few clues available to solve this mystery.
If you are selective in the information you wish to use, you can tell a story. Scientific research should not be doing that. It should be saying, what is the real evidence? Undisputed evidence, what are the facts, and then draw conclusions from the whole story, not through selective identification of, this is the information I wish to use, this information doesn't support my position, so I'm going to ignore it, and by ignoring that and only telling one part of the story, I can convince people to believe that what I'm saying is the fact. That's not the right way to do a proper investigation of an aircraft incident.
How can one continue to seek truth without falling into the trap of speculation? For some experts, it's about digging into the negligence of the Malaysian investigation. In Belfast, Northern Ireland, Don Thompson tirelessly pursues his counter-investigation, looking for new credible clues. Looking back at the conclusions of the official report, the engineer realizes that an aeronautical technology was completely neglected during the investigation, ADS-B.
ADS-B is a very useful technology. It's been used across the world, and it's a significant tool in the future of air navigation. That is typically GPS, a global navigation satellite system.
Around the world, the ADS-B station network receives and records aircraft flight data and redistributes it to control towers in the area. This technology allows aircraft controllers to see the aircrafts on their radar screens.
It's actually providing the same level of surveillance data as modern radar systems do, but it includes the actual position of the aircraft, the definition of the position of the aircraft.
But Don Thompson is surprised that this data is entirely absent from the official report. With further research, he makes a discovery.
I had read that the Department of Civil Aviation had an operational ADS-B site in Malaysia, on the east coast of Malaysia, looking out over the South China Sea. But this had never been mentioned. No data collected from that had ever been mentioned.
In Malaysia, 4 ADS-B stations did record data related to flight MH370. Yet none of the 1,000 pages of the official report mentions it. Very quickly, Don Thompson tries to recover this data from Malaysian Civil Aviation.
The next day, I had an email with a log of about 4 hours worth of data from that ADS-B station, about 6 million records of transmissions from aircraft, including MH370.
The engineer delves into this data and learns of a fundamental element pertaining to the disappearance of flight MH370. The transponder, the tool allowing the plane to be seen by the control tower, did not suddenly stop emitting, as would be the case during a crash. It was gradually switched off step by step from inside the cockpit.
The transponder control panel has a switch, a 5-position switch. At one extreme of the 5 positions it's fully functional. At the other extreme, the transponder is instructed to go into standby mode. So what I believe has happened is that the transponder mode select switch was being cycled from fully operational down to standby.
We realized that it had indeed been shut off manually because there were several positions on the button, and each one corresponds to a piece of information. Since this information was gradually removed, it's almost certain that a person voluntarily turned the button of the transponder to standby. This was a voluntary act done by a person.
Thanks to this new data, investigators make an unprecedented discovery. A person inside the cockpit intentionally tried to make flight MH370 disappear.
I saw a plane that turned off its electronics, did a 180, and hightailed it in the other direction. Right off the bat, that tells me that it's not an accident, that it was intentional, and that whoever did it knew what they were doing. And to me, that suggested intent, and it suggested sophistication.
Who among the 239 people on board could be behind this hijacking? On March 16, 2014, 1 week after the loss of flight MH370, Interpol cleared all passengers on board the aircraft from suspicion.
Once the possibility became apparent that somebody on the plane took it, it became very interesting, okay, who was on this plane? Who might have done it? And so one of the first things the authorities did was to put out word to all the countries whose citizens were on board the plane and say, can you check these people out? And everyone came back and said, yep, they're fine.
As evidence of a hijacking accumulates, how can one go further? For the experts continuing this counter-investigation, the time has come to explore an essential lead, that of the pilot of flight MH370. How to find out more about Zaharia Ahmed Shah, the pilot of flight MH370? In 2019, Patrick Blaley, himself a plane captain, came across a major piece of information, the confidential investigation report of the Malaysian police.
The files of the Malaysian police leaked onto the internet, meaning everyone had access to them. Indeed, they dug into his life. There wasn't much to say about his personal life. As they say in the file, he no longer had the same goals as his family. So he was a little taciturn at that time. His personal life weighed on him. He locked himself in his simulator at home. He was no longer in tune with his family, from what I understand. That's what's mentioned in the Malaysian police report.
But beyond the personality of the pilot, was there material evidence of his guilt? In the police report, investigators make a striking discovery.
Once it became clear that somebody on board the plane took the plane, the chief suspect right out of the gate was the pilot. The veteran Malaysian Airlines pilot, Zaharia Ahmed Shah. And he loved to fly so much that he had in his basement a flight simulator.
Flight recorder, it's on. Voice recorder, test.
He would take this, and on his free time, when he wasn't working flying airplanes, he would play working airplanes. And so the police went to his home and they took the computer, and it had various hard drives and everything, and they looked through the hard drives and they found files, the different flights that he would do.
Investigators looked at his hard drive and extracted the data in the memory cache. They found 8 coordinate points. The recovered trajectory points pass through the Malacca Strait, and the last 2 go to the southern Indian Ocean. People don't take this as proof, but to me, it's indisputable. He had marked 2 points in the southern Indian Ocean with fuel at 0. And on March 8th, he ended up in the southern Indian Ocean with fuel at 0. To me, it's kind of a presumption of guilt, because he had clearly thought out this case scenario. He did so on a simulator, granted, but the actual scenario happened 3 weeks later.
It looked like he was practicing, like about a month before the plane disappeared, he was practicing doing the kind of flight that it seemed like he ultimately did. And so for a lot of people, like, this was kind of case closed. This was the final nail in the coffin that established without a doubt that Zaharia was the culprit and that the plane really did go in the Southern Indian Ocean. Now,
manual shutdown of the transponder. Simulator training over the Indian Ocean. The noose tightens around the pilot, who seems to have intentionally vanished with his 239 passengers. But how could this hypothesis be put to the test in the field? In 2020, Greek engineer Argyris Kamoulakos begins his own investigation. His objective, to try to find out more about the crash thanks to the debris of the plane found in 2015.
As far as I know, very, very few people actually assess the information that can come out of the debris, and they do it in an empirical way. let's say. Based on their own past experience in their careers, they would say, it looks like this is what happened. So I propose to go further than it looks like, but actually do simulations and analysis and develop formulas to assess precisely what is going on. We went in a very scientific way to see what we can interpret from the information that exists.
Could this debris shed more light on the fate of Flight MH370? During his investigation, the engineer makes a first discovery.
We know that there was no cloud of debris that was discovered. Maybe we missed it? Maybe we arrived too late? Maybe most of it sank? But yet, those who survived and they floated around and they arrived years later on the coast of Africa should have been from all sides. It's not the case. Practically all the debris that is credible comes from the right side of the plane.
How to interpret this astonishing coincidence? As an expert in aeronautical structures, Argyris Kamulakos engages in complex calculations. Using a supercomputer, he simulates the impact of the plane on the sea from the recovered debris. After several days of work, he's able to define a very precise scenario.
I believe the wing broke. The engine was liberated and passed over the wing and hit the tailplane. So the aircraft, to my opinion, should be possibly in 4 pieces. We should have the right wing from the position of the engine outwards as one piece, the engine as another piece, the front part of the fuselage, it will detach with the violent impact with the sea, and then the rest of the plane, an integral part. This is what I think the wreckage could look like.
What can be deduced from this simulation? To Argyris Kamulakos, there is no doubt. Flight MH370 was not the victim of an in-flight accident or explosion.
To my opinion, a credible end of flight of the MH370 was a ditching attempt that didn't go as it was supposed to, with the right wing hitting violently the water, and then the rest of the aircraft hit the water. We are not facing a catastrophic crash and disintegration of the aircraft. We are facing a missed ditching biased from the right side of the aircraft.
To this engineer, the analysis of the debris is clear. There was someone at the controls of the plane until the very last second. Could Flight MH370 have been a suicide flight carefully planned by the pilot? This scenario is not impossible. This is evidenced by the 2015 crash of a Germanwings A320.
Some pilots have committed suicidal acts before. Unfortunately, there's an example close to home. The Germanwings accident, where the pilot deliberately crashed the plane in the Alps. You obviously have to pay a lot of attention to the mental health of the pilot. But these events are so rare that you can't generalize either.
But if it was indeed of suicide, taking all the passengers with him, why did he fly incognito for 7 hours? Why orchestrate everything so carefully that the plane would never be found?
I think he wanted to disappear. He wanted to vanish from the face of the earth with his plane and his passengers and never be found. He wanted to disappear without having the responsibility put on his shoulders. It's understandable, because afterwards, his family would have suffered the consequences. His family would have been told that their father killed 239 passengers in the depths of the Indian Ocean. I think his family would have taken it very badly, and understandably so. I think he didn't want to leave that image behind. So, if it was indeed a suicide, why didn't he do it in the morning when he left home? It's the same thing with Germanwings. Andreas Lubitz should have crashed his car into a wall or a tree, but he didn't. He wanted to die at the controls of his plane. I think that Zahari Shah wanted to leave with his plane to a place where he would never be found. But unfortunately for him, he forgot two things. First, he had left the simulator with the famous traces that we found, the 2 coordinates. And second, Inmarsat. He didn't know about the traceability that enabled us to reconstruct arcs. And thanks to these arcs, we were able to put together the trajectory. So he thought of everything except 2 things, the arcs and his simulator, from which he didn't erase the data.
Nearly a decade after the disappearance of Flight MH370, experts continue to analyze the available evidence in hopes of seeing more clearly. But they also know that in the absence of the plane, caution is essential.
I was immediately convinced that it was very important to have an opinion on the pilot, the captain. It makes a huge difference to know whether or not the captain might be guilty of something in this case. That's why I decided to meet with his relatives. One of the very important meetings I had was with his older sister, Sakinab, who told me about the little brother whom she loved and about his life journey. I realized that, on one hand, the man, the captain, was a good man, and on the other hand, that it was wrong to accuse the pilot.
I think we need to be careful in terms of placing blame on individuals when we really don't know what happened. To accuse someone of being suicidal and homicidal, that is a major accusation, and we don't have conclusive evidence that that is the case. I think it is a possibility, but I also don't want to make a strong assertion that that is what happened, because the fact is we don't know.
Will we ever find the precious black boxes of Flight MH370?
Looking for a plane in the Indian Ocean is like looking for a needle in a haystack. It is. But technology will continue to evolve. The company that looked for the wreckage in 2018 has announced capabilities for next year that are almost 5 to 6 times greater than they had before. So, I'd say maybe 20 years from now, we'll have automated systems to scan the bottom of the oceans. And if we start by the area near the 7th arc, we're bound to stumble upon it.
The truth is, until we find that aircraft, we will never truly know what happened to the MH370 flight.
Today, the families of the missing continue to lobby the authorities to resume the search for Flight MH370. Along with independent experts, they represent the only line of defense against the abandonment of one of the most complex aeronautical investigations of the 21st century. They all know that the only recovery of the black boxes could make it possible to determine whether the truth lies somewhere among the hundreds of theories formulated so far.